This is from the first chapter of Itch by Simon Mayo. Itchingham Loft had caused explosions before. There had, in truth, been so many bangs, flashes and smells coming from the bedroom in his past. His multi-stained carpet and pock-marked walls bore testament to that, but there'd been nothing like this one. It wasn't just the bedroom walls that had shook, it was the whole house. Not that Itchingham was aware of any of it. He was unconscious, and he'd have stayed that way too if it hadn't been for the fact that his eyebrows were on fire, and the astute decision of his 11-year-old sister Chloe to throw a mug of water over his face. Itch. Everyone called him Itch, apart from his mother, whose idea it had been to christen him Itchingham in the first place, sat up sharply, shaking the water out of his eyes. "What did you do that for, Chloe?" he said. "I did have it all under control, you know." Chloe shrugged. "Yeah, right. Your eyebrows were burning." And she turned and went back to her bedroom. Itch felt the prickly remains of what used to be his eyebrows, and what was left crumbled in his fingers. Then the unmistakable smell of burned hair filled his nostrils, and he realised Chloe had been right. He stood up a little gingerly and thought he'd better go after her and admit it, but when he poked his head into her room, he found she was already asleep. Itch went into the bathroom to dry and inspect his face. Both eyebrows had indeed gone, and about an inch of his fringe too. His wavy blonde hair tended to be straggly anyway, but this explosion had forced it into a shape Itch couldn't remember seeing before. Most of the sooty black smudge on the left side of his face came away with a vigorous rub. Itch went back to his room and surveyed the mess. A really bad one this time. White smoke hung in the air and clung to the walls. Where the contents of his beaker had splashed, the carpet had turned black. Itch thought it had been originally green, but that was a long time ago. The beaker itself had shattered into pieces, 3 of which had embedded themselves in the curtains, where they continued to smoulder. Burn marks surrounded each fragment. He climbed onto his bed to retrieve them and stood on a 4th piece, which crunched and then poked its way through his sock. Itch winced and pulled it free. Blood began to ooze through the cotton. Itch changed into his pyjamas and took his clothes, along with his blood-soaked sock, downstairs to wash. This, he had learned, was the only way to get rid of the smell of smoke. 31 minutes later, the machine beeped at him and he hung up his clothes to dry. With any luck, thought Itch, Mum won't notice and I'll just about get away with it. He had got away with so much over the years that this wasn't necessarily wishful thinking. But Itchingham and Loft had forgotten about his missing eyebrows. Jude Loft arrived home just after 11:30. Though she often had to work weekends, this was late even for her. Itch had been in bed for 20 minutes, but was nowhere near asleep. It always took his brain a couple of hours to shut down anyway, but tonight he was lying in his dark room, increasingly aware of how much it stank. Even with the window open, as it had been for the 2 hours since the explosion, there was really no escaping the smell of burning phosphorus. He was annoyed with himself for many reasons, mostly because he'd used too much of the phosphorus he'd collected from a couple of old ship's flares. Too many match heads as well. And maybe, on balance, mixing them up with a screwdriver had been one of his more stupid ideas. Itch heard his mother shut and bolt the door and go into the kitchen. She wouldn't inspect anything too closely. Normally she made herself a cup of tea and then worked downstairs in her study until very late. He heard the kettle being filled and the clatter of the tea tin. Then a silence, followed by his mum's footsteps in the hall, where she stopped. Itch tensed. He could hear sniffing. His mother was now coming up the stairs, still sniffing. The smell of burning phosphorus in his room had been so strong he hadn't noticed the whole house was full of the stench. "Hello, Itchingham. Been busy?" Mum sat down on the side of Itchingham's bed. This was, he knew, the calm before the storm. "Hello, Mum. Yeah, I've done my French homework, though I wasn't thinking about your homework. I was thinking of the smell of bonfires, which, as we're nowhere near the 5th of November, almost certainly means you've had another accident." I really need to think of somewhere else to hide my stuff, thought Itch as he pulled the damp remains of the evening's experiment out from under the bed. You really need to think of somewhere else to hide things, Itchingham, his mum said, as though reading his mind. Did you honestly think I wouldn't look here? How many times, Itchingham? How many times? I told you the last time when you set fire to your bed, any more accidents, and that was it. But that was the classic volcano experiment, Mum, said Itch. I just hadn't realised how close the duvet was. That's enough. Stop. No more experiments. At all. Done. Have I made myself clear, said Mum. I want all your kit. Chemicals, powders, potions, flasks, and whatever else you've got hidden away in your wardrobe outside in the garden after school tomorrow. No explosions, no volcanoes, no bubbling, burning hydrogen bubbles, nothing. But I can't just leave it in the garden. Itchy's jaw dropped. It's not safe. He felt a bit panicky. His kit, as his mum called it, had taken him a long time to assemble and was his pride and joy. His friends at school talked mainly of football and surfing. He had no interest in the first and only a passing one in the second. His passion, his really lame hobby, as Chloe called it, was about to be cleared out forever. Itchingham Loft's obsession was a strange one. It thrilled him to his core, but he was coming to the conclusion that he might be on his own. He couldn't understand why no one else got it. As soon as he tried to explain, everyone changed the subject. Some people could name every single computer game released in the last year. Others could describe every goal scored by Manchester United in the current season. Itch could name, explain, and was collecting the elements. The table of elements, the periodic table. Whoever came up with those titles, Itch thought, had done a spectacularly bad job. It was as if they were trying to put people off. If it had been called the Rocks Factor, more people would get it. If his hobby was marketed in newsagents with 118 to collect, who wants gold and silver? Get your plutonium here. Maybe things would be a little different. There was, he thought, no point in collecting anything else. This was the most exciting thing. The periodic table was the catalogue of everything that existed in the universe, stripped down to its 118 basic ingredients. If it was honest, part of him was relieved that most people just let him get on with it. How boring to be the same as anyone else. Did the world need another footballer? He didn't think so.